A decisive move has been made in Washington. Targets are no longer theoretical, Chewy. They are written into a report delivered directly to the desk of the president.
What's on the table is not a limited response, but a large-scale air campaign. Military bases, strategic facilities, critical buildings. Iran's air defenses are weakened, fragmented, and under pressure. Stopping such an operation would be extremely difficult, if not impossible. And at the center of this target list lies Iran's most powerful instrument, the Revolutionary Guards. This is no longer about warnings. This is about execution. Protests in Iran have grown significantly in scale. Reports indicate that in some areas of the capital alone, there are more than 200,000 protesters. The exiled prince has called for new strategies and demonstrations. For the third time, he has urged people to gather in city centers, emphasizing the need to take control of these areas. He tactically revealed that Iranian police and soldiers are attempting to establish control in side streets by setting up checkpoints. Therefore, he advised that while protesters navigate side streets, they might encounter difficulties, and they should instead congregate on main roads. Demonstrations are indeed unfolding in this manner. So far, 27 government buildings have been set ablaze. Protesters advancing along main roads have reached control buildings and begun setting up camps around them. Their goal is to prevent the use of these buildings and to secure control. However, the Iranian regime has started to respond harshly. According to current data, around 200 people have died and 2,600 have been detained. To quell the situation, the government has labeled participants as enemies of religion and bolstered law enforcement. A major issue has arisen: the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. It is believed that units receiving direct orders from the center without restrictions are about to intervene. Some groups argue that the Revolutionary Guards should be prohibited from participating in the events. However, the regime seems unlikely to heed this. The deployment of Iran's elite forces across all streets could have significant consequences. Although this has not fully occurred yet, there is information that it is being discussed and considered internally within the country. The ongoing and expanding protests are prompting such counteractions. The United States is poised to take action. Reports indicate that a document has been compiled and previously identified potential targets have been reviewed. These targets include critical structures. Historically, the U.S. Air Force deployed B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, while the Navy launched Tomahawk missiles from submarines, jointly attacking the Fordo uranium enrichment plant, the Natanz nuclear facility, and the Isfahan Nuclear Technology Center, nearly obliterating them. The use of powerful bombs caused the collapse of structures within mountains. Currently, potential new targets are likely to include military installations and administrative zones, with the headquarters of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards being a significant focus. If they respond excessively to protests, their main headquarters might be targeted. President Trump has reiterated, as before, that there should be no severe intervention against demonstrators, and if such a situation arises, the response will differ. Additionally, he posted on the Truth Social network, stating, "Iran is perhaps aiming for freedom more than ever before. The USA is ready to help." Last night, it was reported that the White House engaged in preliminary talks about potential attack plans against Iran. The State Department also cautioned, "Do not play games with President Trump. When he says he will do something, he is truly serious." This seriousness is evident in the decisions regarding Venezuela and other sanction measures. Generally, when he makes a statement, he strives to fulfill it. As mentioned, the U.S. has identified these targets and emphasized that preparations for an operation must be made. This does not necessarily mean an operation will occur, but the fact that targets are being discussed and preparations are underway at military bases suggests significant steps are being taken. According to the Daily Mail platform, preparations for an attack are in progress. In response, the Iranian government announced it would retaliate. They declared that in the event of an incident, they would target military bases and structures in the vicinity. There are even U.S. warships south of Iran. and they stated they would target numerous locations, including those. The situation is becoming increasingly complex. Upon returning to Iran, it was evident that the government had already disrupted internet services in recent days. This action aimed to halt communication, preventing the situation from escalating and regaining control. However, protesters have countered with an alternative approach. With phone lines also unreliable, they have turned to Starlink satellites for a solution. Currently, some individuals possess Starlink antennas, typically those acting as temporary leaders. These leaders use Starlink to communicate among themselves and manage the situation. There is a general organizational structure in place, allowing these leaders to discuss where to advance or avoid. It is likely that the Iranian government will respond with new measures. So, how has Iran's leadership addressed this mounting challenge? What emerges is a carefully crafted dual strategy. On one hand, the state has heavily relied on force. Brigadier General Ahmad Reza Radan, head of the Internal Security Forces, announced the arrest of individuals identified as the unrest's organizers, stating they would face legal consequences. This message served as a clear warning. The government is ready to deploy its full security apparatus to regain control. Simultaneously, a contrasting message has been conveyed. President Masoud Pezeshkian, speaking on state television, adopted a more conciliatory tone. He expressed the government's willingness to listen to public grievances and emphasized a commitment to addressing economic difficulties. His statement about the goal of fairly distributing everything we have among the people was directed at the general public, particularly those protesting over living conditions rather than ideology. Essentially, this was a classic attempt to divide the movement by reassuring the undecided majority. The main aim of this dual strategy seems to be to undermine the protests from within. The message, though subtle, is unmistakable. Economic hardships are recognized, solutions are promised, and thus, ongoing unrest is depicted as unnecessary. Whether these gestures are genuine or strategic, they appear primarily intended to ease tensions, rather than bring about immediate structural change. On the ground, however, the reality is much harsher than official statements indicate. Activist networks and human rights organizations report that security forces have employed excessive force, with allegations that hundreds of protesters have been killed. Confirming these reports has become extremely challenging due to a nationwide internet shutdown lasting over 60 hours. This blackout has severely disrupted communication, restricted access to independent information, and made coordination or emergency calls nearly impossible. Monitoring groups have warned that such outages pose a direct threat to civilian safety. Simultaneously, unsettling images circulating on social media, though difficult to verify, contribute to the perception that events are unfolding beyond the state's controlled narrative. So, what might be the outcome? The most probable scenario is that the authorities manage to gradually suppress the protests through a combination of force, digital isolation, and selective economic concessions. This strategy might restore short-term stability, but it does not address the root causes. Economic discontent and social anger would persist, potentially re-emerging later with greater intensity. Over time, the state risks losing what remains of its domestic legitimacy, especially among younger generations. Internationally, this could intensify a siege mentality, reinforcing hardline stances in regional policy and nuclear negotiations. A second scenario suggests that the protests might persist and transform into a more structured political challenge, even in the face of repression. In this situation, internal conflicts could intensify, particularly between influential security forces and the civilian leadership striving to appear moderate. Although a complete regime collapse seems improbable in the short term, changes within the power hierarchy could become inevitable, especially as the nation anticipates a future transition after Khamenei. A third, riskier scenario involves direct foreign military intervention, notably by the United States. Such an action would almost certainly trigger Iranian retaliation against regional targets, potentially dragging the Middle East into a broader conflict and disrupting global energy markets. Paradoxically, an external threat might also bolster the government's position domestically, enabling it to portray internal dissent as a national security concern and rally public support under the guise of unity. Ultimately, the situation in Iran extends beyond a mere wave of protests. It serves as a real-time examination of how a political system reacts when its foundations are under pressure. Economic collapse, widespread dissatisfaction, harsh repression, digital isolation, external pressure, and regional instability have all converged simultaneously. The leadership is attempting to bridge its legitimacy gap with promises and rhetoric, while relying on force to maintain control. Whether this strategy succeeds will depend not only on the persistence of the protesters, but also on how international actors choose to respond. We will continue to monitor developments closely. That's all for now. Stay tuned for further analysis. See you.